A long, long time ago, in a solar system far, far away, white people were engaged in a war against a rising, race-mixing force from the stars, Satan and his racially diverse fleet of fighters. This war went on for millions of years, until one fateful day, the Aryan Space Force found itself in a pitched battle in orbit of a primitive Earth. Satan had paid interstellar black people to pilot skirmishers as the evil mothership commanded them from afar. One by one, enemy spacecraft crash-landed onto the planet below, until finally the satanic mothership was overwhelmed by Aryan fire, and it too plummeted to the Earth. The Aryan Space Force tried frantically to repair their own damaged vessel, even as it followed Satan and his army of black people down into the atmosphere. Asians were there too, I think. Welcome to The Empire Never Ended. I'm Fritz of Aristarchus Taint, joined here by Boris and Ray.
Hello.
How y'all doing?
Good, pretty good, yeah.
All right,
How are
glad
you?
to hear it. Glad to hear it. I'm all fucked up, Ray. This fucked my brain.
Christian
my brain is
identity
fucked.
fucked you up.
Christian identity has made me a shell of who I once was. So you know what?
What?
Let's just get right back into it.
Okay.
So anyway, you got the Asians there, you got the crashed black space pilots there, you've got Satan's mothership having landed on the Earth, the Aryan space forces also landing on the Earth. So anyway, these Aryan spacemen find themselves stranded in the middle of Eurasia, surrounded on all sides by their mortal enemies, who went on miscegenating with each other to create subtler races, like Pacific Islander and Communist. So here's the twist. All that stuff that I just told you about them coming in a spaceship and being like physical white people with like white skin and all that, forget all that, because these are like Aryan aliens who are maybe not even material beings, I don't know. So I guess they're like a special Aryan alien energy also at this point. And so after about 150,000 years of battling for the soul of the galaxy on Earth, that is to say like 7,000 years ago, these like Aryan energy aliens decide to become flesh. And behold, Adam and Eve.
It just kind of reminded me of Scientology a little bit.
Exactly.
Yes,
Yeah.
it does. Except the Scientology one is, I think, much better with like the TWA airliners and shit and the volcanoes.
The
Well,
body
it's-
thetans and the
This is like
Esoteric
Scientology
yeah.
plus Nazism, which
Yes.
is not
Yeah.
any poor woman for Scientology.
Yeah, Christian identity makes Scientology look completely rational by comparison. Yes. So, all right. So you got Adam and Eve, the Aryan aliens made flesh. But there's a problem. There's a twist. Who's that there? Who's that there lurking around in the Garden of Eden?
The snake, which is...
Yes, it's that half snake, half orangutan space alien named Satan, and he's focusing his sensual reptilian wiles on Eve. It's all here in this detailed illustration that I found. So yeah, Satan seduces Eve with his sexy satanic moves.
And he's half orangutan. That's interesting.
Well, he's some kind of ape. Yeah, I think.
A snaky ape.
Yeah, he's like a snake ape. He's an alien snake ape. So So Eve begets our sexy Satan a son named Cain. Now Cain, boys, he's a bad guy. He's a bad dude.
Oh.
Once he even killed his own brother, a white guy,
My own brother.
a white dude, Abel.
Horrible, yes.
Yeah. Another time, if that wasn't bad enough, another time, he created the whole Akkadian Empire in order to eventually demand unpayable debts from Germany from a bank in Switzerland.
Oh.
What a fucking guy. What a scamp this Cain is. So luckily, though, the father of all Aryans, Adam, and the mother of all Aryans and also all satanic Jewish shapeshifters, Eve, had another kid, and they called him Seth. So Seth would be the first in this noble line of the Adamic race from which everything that we like about Europe and the Middle East came from. You know, like the pyramids and shit like that. Not so much from East Asia. They were apparently here 720,000 years before anybody else was. But all the stuff we don't like, all that stuff, all the stuff in the Middle East that we hate, that stuff, that's all from serpentine, shape-shifting alien Jews. So literally, everybody, basically, everyone except white folk is a Jew. But sometimes also some white folk are Jews. But also sometimes a particular tribe of Khazars that somehow run the whole world, they're Jews. And also sometimes all the descendants of Cain are Jews. But they're all Jews. They're all Jews. But the Aryan space gene, don't worry, continues. Despite being this like white island on this like swarthy sea of evil, the Aryan space gene continues through Seth into his descendants like Noah, who refuse to bump uglies with their non-white neighbors, and thus are spared God's terrible vengeance. And the gene now passes through Abraham to Isaac, the father of all of today's Aryan tribes. And his son, Isaac's son, Isaac's son, a Saxon, a serial monogamist named Jacob, has many children with many women, and some really cool ones, like Dan. Dan, he's like the best. Dan goes and starts the heroic Danish people. Another is Ephraim.
Wait, they really think that a guy named Dan founded Denmark?
He founded the Dan's. It's Dan's mark. That's the mark that Dan left.
It's logical. Yeah.
Totally
makes sense.
Yeah. You know, they also had Ephraim, who we know from Ep 50, founded the English. You know, and the tribe of Manasseh, who founded the ancient tribe of wasps. Incidentally, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants in America. Indeed, each of Jacob's sons. We should now, by the way, probably call him Israel, the name he took now, went on to form some great European culture, eventually becoming kings and czars, noblemen, even visiting America just before the so-called indigenous people got there. And against them stood, of course, the Jewish hordes of pre-Adamic civilizations in this like multi-millennial struggle to destroy the Israelites. The Jews want to destroy Israel. That sounds right, yeah?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So wait,
okay.
Ancient Jews were on North America before indigenous people, and thus also before the white man.
Or are indigenous people Jews also?
Or are indigenous people also Jews, yeah.
We will not be taking questions in this round. Well, okay.
This has been Christian Identity Bible Study with Fritz.
The best way to answer that is probably to get into the diversity of characters here. So there's a lot of different people kind of inputting their own take onto this story, and a lot of these characters and also like what each of the races are, especially the Jews, changes over time. And as like it gets passed from someone stupider to someone even stupider until you end up today with like debates that I find on BitChute between like Christian identitarians and pagans shit. So yeah, it's going on. It's still going. This line of thought.
Our buddy
Scientology of Nazis.
Caleb Sutter was a Christian ID guy.
That's right.
And his dad was a preacher. Right?
Yeah. So that was pretty much the Christian identity myth, rather the creation myth of Christian identity in a nutshell, as told mostly by William Potter Gale, who's probably one of our main characters today, and his rival / mentor Wesley Smith, back both in the 1950s. So both of these men are complete idiots. So just in brief, I guess, what is Christian identity? That should be established, because this is going to be a fucking crazy story to follow, and I think it's good if we just keep our eyes on the prize, which is Christian identity. So Christian identity is the belief that white people are the descendants of the biblical tribes of Israel, not just the lost 10 tribes, but they kicked the Jews out of these tribes, and they're all the tribes of Israel are white folk. The Jews, on the other hand, are the direct genetic descendants of Satan, and that the mission of white people is to engage in the coming apocalyptic struggle against satanic Jews and their miscegenating allies. So that is basically Christian identity.
Yeah.
So thanks to Ray, back in episode 50, we learned about the progenitors of Christian identity, the British Israelites, who are going to be around for probably the first half of this episode. So I don't know. Before we get around to like our boys here, Swift and Gale. Swift and Gale. We will talk to Ray for a minute. Ray, do you mind filling in our free listeners here what they missed on our Patreon?
Well, okay. I'll try to be concise. So British Israelism, also known as Anglo-Israelism, is let's call it a movement founded in the late 19th century Britain by a bunch of middle-class people who claimed they found proof that the Brits are biological descendants of ancient Israelites. That's more or less that. There was a few changes in the movement. So the first founder actually had a more pan-Germanic outlook, and he thought that all Western European people were descendants of ancient Israelites. But later the movement adopted this more British-oriented ideology that only the British peoples are ancient Israelites. This, of course, coincided with the unification of Germany and Germany becoming a rival to the British Empire.
But just to clarify, Jews are still Israelites in that version.
Yes, I will get to that. So in this ideology, the actual Jews, as Fritz said, are also descendants of ancient Israelites, but they are, in their opinion, a kind of a lesser kind of Israelites. They are from the two tribes that were not really God's favorite Israelites. And in addition to that, through the ages, they also race mixed, the Jews, so they became even worse kind of Israelites. But they're still their brothers and Israelites, although these people always like to point out that they are themselves not Jews. Jews are Israelites, but Israelites are not Jews. This was very important for them.
Yeah,
right.
So the movement spread already in the 19th century. It spread to Canada and United States. And in the 30s, it started to mutate into a more openly and violently anti-Semitic kind of British Israelism. And some of the leaders in the 20s and 30s started forging alliances between British Israelite groups in America and Canada with groups such as the Ku Klux Klan and with known anti-Semites and pro-Nazis like Henry Ford. So one of the more crucial leaders of British Israelism in America was a guy called William Cameron, who was a close associate of Henry Ford for decades, and wrote most of the Henry Ford's book, The International Jew, and like a very notorious anti-Semite, and also a leader of British Israelism. So this mutation when British Israelism in America starts to become more openly anti-Semitic and has these ties with the groups like KKK. I think this is where the roots of what we call Christian identity can be found, and which I guess Fritz will tell us more about.
Yeah, so there's really like three key situations that prompted that transition from British Israelism, which, man, I hate saying so much. I'm just going to call it like BI, if that's okay with everybody. And yep. Christian identity, which I'll probably just call identity, because trying to say over and over again, British Israelism to Christian identity is going to break me. So
and switch, BI to CI is just corny.
This is corny. So we're going to say BI to identity. So the first might be the Balfour Declaration, right? Where the UK recognized the rights of Jews to settle in Palestine as their homeland. Which
we talked about in our episode with Pinto back.
Back in Arc 2.
Yeah, back in Arc 2.
Yeah. So now that's all kind of well and good in theory, right? Because like the Jewish settlement of Palestine is an important step on the path towards the, eventual apocalypse and all that. And but the problem is that the British Empire is both kind of disinterested in permanent settlements and also like eventually Zionists begin to want to push the British out, and so the idea is that the Jews are getting too much of their share of this prophecy. This is kind of starting to settle in. And the second catalyst is probably these like very mundane power struggles going on in the British Israeli movement between Toronto and Vancouver. And then finally the last situation is like some theological inventions developed in this moment out from outside of this movement, more but still that interacted quite closely with it. And
When
that
is
is
this?
through where are these books? This is interwar. Well, one of them is David Davidson. Maybe you remember him from the British Israelites. He kind of made his own pyramidism philosophy, and which had like a huge impact on a lot of these different movements. Even like William Pelly, the silver shirts guy, even he worked in like Davidson's pyramidism, and he hated British Israelism and stuff.
Yeah, maybe just to point out, I didn't mention when I tried to summarize British Israelism that the way they tried to prove their point that they're descendants of ancient Israelites was only through like pseudoscience, like you mentioned, periodism, and especially like this bogus etymology, exactly like you mentioned, Isaac's sons, that's actually Saxons, and so on. So that's, everything is based on nothing, really.
Mm-hmm.
I love the implication that people named Isaac were just fine being called Sack. It's great.
Yes.
All right.
Sack.
Yeah, well, that was before they invented middle school, so I guess maybe he was fine. It's Sack. All right. Yeah. Okay.
They
so
called
you
them
had
satchels back then, anyway.
nut
satchel.
My nut satchel.
Yeah.
Who says we're fucking adolescent? Come on. All right. So pyramidism, important. Also, this armchair archaeology of a woman named Ellen Bristow. So, in short, on the David Davidson side, on the pyramid side, he also gave us the idea that Cain, who is still Adam's son in this version, interbred with pre-Adamites and produced what historian Michael Barkun, who we use a lot in this episode and the last one about these people, summarized as the offspring of prodigious physical size and strength, but diminished spiritual capacities. Again, Davidson kind of outside this movement, like writing into it, Bristow also says that something similar, but says that Sargon of Akkad, the YouTuber, is Cain, and that all great works of the Middle East were only possible because an Adamite, Cain, conquered them. And so basically he is an Adamite, but he's like an evil Adamite. And from there, Cain created the first civilization made to worship Cain's patron saint, the devil. She's not like BI, she's not identity, she thinks she's doing archaeology. Yes. So by 1922, Vancouver has become the center of British Israelism in America overall. And multiple groups joined this British Israel Association of Greater Vancouver. So Vancouver-based British Israelites began to make connections with BI voices up and down the West Coast in the U.S., Los Angeles in particular. And in Los Angeles at this time, there's a 381% growth in sects and cults here in the 20s, in the first part of the 20s here. And it becomes like obviously a really important node in a lot of different networks, like weird spiritualist things and stuff like that, but including British Israelism. Especially in 1930, when Howard Rand, who we talked about in Ray's BI episode, who basically the guy that really made British Israelism like super racist, sets up his Anglo-Saxon Federation there in LA. So the Anglo-Saxon Federation expands through the efforts of a guy named Philip E.J. Monson, who founds the Kingdom Bible College in L.A., which becomes like a very important center for creating new British Israelites that are much more Christian identity than British Israelites, and this Millenarian Covenant Evangelistic Association that gets all the way out into the West, that gets all the way up and down the West Coast and into Idaho and to Utah. Utah is an interesting connection that we're not going to quite crack open as much as we probably could, but we'll do a little bit on Utah. So in the early 1930s, the British Israel Association of Greater Vancouver decides to go all Canada and makes this thing called the Dominion, because they were trying to come up with a name that sounded, cool and hip. The Dominion Federation, which is based actually not in Vancouver, but Toronto, because these guys in Toronto had a totally independent movement that was closer to London, and they were developing their own thing, and they already had London support, so the entire center of the movement moves to Toronto. And Vancouver, which is the way more racist one, starts to feel kind of left out and subservient now, where they were kind of leading the movement before. And so there's a lot more now interaction between these LA groups that are coming up in a time like where there's with high clan memberships, silver shirts, all these motherfuckers, right? And so and that's making the Vancouver sect, there's like a feedback loop where the Vancouver group is also becoming increasingly openly anti-Semitic, and their like theology starts to like shift a lot in this period.
And there were a bunch of Bundists in LA as well, no?
Yeah, absolutely. Every fucking Nazi freak was in LA. LA's like the weird Detroit in the 30s. Like yeah.
So one of the most important currents in post-war American fascism was started by Canadians, it seems.
Yeah, and especially the real nail in the coffin. That's not quite the way to put it. The thing that finally, I think, truly split theologically Christian identity from British Israelism has a lot to do with something called the dual seed line position. Which we're going to talk about in 1 second, and that's Monson. That's the guy that was sort of the protege of Rand that opened up the Bible college thing. But there was another guy, just before we get to him, whose name was Frederick Haberman, who was a German-born Canadian-British Israelite, Canada, historian. If you look him up online, he's a historian who wrote such titles as A Message from the Great Pyramids to America, which was perhaps like the first, and he's probably perhaps the first like truly Christian identity theorist, kind of, with this book he wrote called Tracing Our Ancestors for the Descendants of Apes or Adam in 1934. So here the Jews were the corrupted progeny of Cain, / Sargon of Akkad, who had been condemned to wander throughout the Euphrates in 3800 BCE. They were the mutant offspring of idolaters and traitors to the Adamic race, and this would be probably the most generous picture of the Jews' Christian identity would ever muster up. That at its most generous, they were the mutant offspring of traitors to the Adamic race. And that was like Christian identity being nice. It gets like, it's all downhill from there.
So it gets pretty bad, huh?
Yeah. So Phil Monson, the Bible college guy, Rand's protege, he is writing about the same time, and he introduces this dual seed line theory, or two seed line theory that I mentioned, two seed line position, to Haberman's kind of mythology here. And he centers Satan very prominently in this. So in his version, the satanic bloodline stemmed from Cain himself, who is still Adam's son, and God's bloodline from Abel and Seth, and they were all very interested in keeping their bloodlines separate and pure. I guess because the brothers thought they shouldn't fuck each other's daughters. I don't know what the issue was, but they were really, I don't know if there was a like what could be miscommunicated. We definitely should not fuck each other. Like that was what they decided there. So, good for them. So most of the satanic seed line, though, that comes from Cain was killed in the flood. Although enough of them survived to sort of threaten the 12 tribes of Israel through like subterfuge, So Monson tapped Bristow's precursor, Bristow, the woman who did the whole Sargon of Akkad is Cain thing. Her precursor was a guy from the 19th century, this Free Church of Scotland minister named, what was his name? Alexander Heaslop, who said that this satanic seed line was the seed of Nimrod, the guy who rebelled against God and in his whatever weird history ordered the Tower of Babel. And now Nimrod's satanic Cainian line is preserved by the Catholic Church, at the heart of the Catholic Church. So Monson here, the British Israelite guy, claimed that the Pope was the prime minister of the devil, and thus Catholics were the enemies of Aryans, of these Israelites rather. So that's where you get your like super anti-Catholic stuff coming from out of here. So in 1937, the Vancouver British Israelites defect from the Dominion. And in retaliation, London ceases to recognize the entire Vancouver part of the BI group. So in Seattle, In 37, United States and Vancouver British Israeli types launched the first in like the series of conferences that will go on for the next 10 years throughout Vancouver and Portland and Los Angeles, but this first one's in Seattle. And they named this new union the Convention of the Anglo-Saxon Federation of North America. And so by 1947, this was a vast network that covered the entire West Coast, keeping like an unbroken tie to Vancouver. So still in 37, Bill Cameron, Ford's, the guy we talked about, Ford's like degenerate, drunk, anti-Semitic public face guy, prominent British Israelite.
Close friend, I think.
And close friend. He's elected president of this Anglo-Saxon Federation of America. Cameron's writings at this time were claiming that the line of Esau, Isaac's son, so one of the Saxons, amalgamated with the Jews and corrupted the Jewish religion from within, which is a weird take. So in his take, the Saxons also corrupted the Jews and basically made like... I think in this way, he kind of like implies that Judaism is just gone. Like it hasn't been around for a while. And what you really have is like dark-skinned Edomite ancestors of Herod who massacred babies to prevent the birth of Jesus, that those guys are the guys that are Jews now. And like whatever originally was a Jew is gone or something. So whatever Bill Cameron, this is what Bill Cameron was like writing, between like vomiting in the toilets and like drinking raw eggs, after a beer for breakfast, Yeah. So one important figure from this 37 conference is a guy named J.W. Parker, but forget him. I'm just mentioning him because he was important to BI, but I don't care. What I care about is his son, C.F. Parker, that's his son, who was born into the movement. So he's one of these Beck types, born into British Israelism, who would become one of these little anti-Semitic boulders that start the whole avalanche down to like satanic Jewtown. And he resented this Zionist desire, of course, to end British rule in Palestine. And he went on this tangent in 1948 called A Short History of Esau, Edom, and Jewry, where he claimed that the ancestors of true Judah still existed and were locked in a battle against some Edomian Hittite posers who pretended to be from Abraham's nuts, but his nut satchel, but were in fact Ashkenazi communists. Okay.
All right.
So now we're in.
talking.
This is like the defining mood of the 40s. The 40s is where shit gets a lot more colorful. So
we're really taking the short bus to Nazi town, like
yeah, space Nazi town. So So other texts from the 40s that were really important. They're novels. They're like fic. They're like fash fic. One of them is called When, a prophetical novel from the very near future from 44, and also from 44, When Gog Attacks, which established like a more overtly through fiction now a satanic origin of the Jews I think they started making this like synagogue of Satan thing really popular, which is actually a reference to Revelations, to a group of people attacking the church who quote say they are Jews but are not, and that's supposedly the synagogue of Satan in Revelations.
Okay, so interesting. So what Temple of Blood is trying to spread their message through like fiction that actually has its roots. It has a
pedigree.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it has a pedigree. It's part of the American tradition, I would say. So
Scientology,
Jews,
Mormonism.
Yeah, we love our fash fic, So Jews, we're a nation of joiners.
I suppose some poor moron really believed everything he heard.
Jews for these texts were now a Turco-Mongol race, and there are strong implications from this point on that they are literally shapeshifters. So this is the environment in which Wesley Smith's like 30-year-old just smooth pool of a brain, these are the ideas that swam around in there. So right. Swift is actually a Jerseyite son of a Methodist minister born in like 1913, I think, who, according to the FBI, supposedly attended Columbia University, supposedly, they say, for a doctorate in divinity and later took a postgraduate course at Harvard. So he's often referred to, even by the FBI, as Dr. Swift, even though I think most of the agents who met and worked with him don't believe he has those qualifications. I'm pretty sure he just has like a Bible study background. At, like,
that would have been
college.
Easy to kind of follow up on, right? I mean,
yeah.
Call up Columbia and be like, hey, did you guys award a PhD to this guy?
Yeah, as far as I know, from what I understood from our friend Barkun here, that he just for sure studied at a college in LA, one of these like BI colleges. So anyway, he's often referred to as Dr. Swift. Maybe I think we're all suspicious just because of the things that he wrote and thinks. and says and that kind of stuff. So even in the 1940s, Swift was already claiming that Jews are shapeshifters. They come in red, black, yellow, and brown, and as well as off-colored white. The Jews, according to Swift, were the children of Satan and Eve. That's who they are now. So they've lost their Adamite heritage completely. They're not even fucking human, basically, at this point. They're half alien, satanic spawn. And now what's left is like white people are alone in this like vast sea of racial others. And Swift will often talk about, he'll say this in so many of his sermons, like, do you know that white people are now only 1/6 of the world's population? And we are swimming in a sea of enemies. And this is like his kind of thing, you know? But like, wouldn't every 1/6 of the population be able to say that exact same thing?
Yes, presumably.
Really? So I don't know. Seems like it's working out pretty well. But they're all Jews is the thing for him, for his buddy Gale especially. But yeah. So fine. Maybe you can get behind like this if you're a British Israelite. Maybe you can get behind this Jews are the spawn of Satan thing. That can get you. But British Israelites were notoriously like millenarian and prophetic. Like they loved prophecies and counting pyramid inches to determine important dates and, you know, making them make sense and all that kind of shit. And these LA British identity people kind of hated that. They thought it kind of made people look dumb, you know, like they were always wrong for one. And also, you know, you get this question like, why should I even care that we're surrounded by the armies of Satan? The prophecies already spoke. Like we're the promised people. It's going to work out, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
So this is what I imagine Swift would say to a person like that, a fool like that. He would say, now listen, I love me a pyramid as much as the next guy, but I tell you that pyramid prophecy stuff is boring. It's all math, which is true, by the way. You want to hear something cool? Shape-shifting satanic reptilian aliens, motherfucker! That's Christianity! The rapture might not even happen if those Jews subvert God's plan. Get your guns! I love LA! I think that's what he would say if he were here today.
Yeah.
Wesley Swift was a psycho. He's just his sermons are him screaming, changing topic on like a dime. Yeah. So the Gale. So that's the change.
Does he change the topic like Trump, where he's like, oh, and by the way, and it's like launches into something.
No, I'm telling you,
different?
like literally, like he's talking about like aliens, and then he starts talking about like, and you know the Russians don't even know where Venus is. They're gonna miss Venus by 5,000 miles. Did you know that? You know, which wasn't true. They nailed it.
The Venera probes.
He would like, for real. It was all a crazy mix of, and also it's always been a mix, especially with Swift, of a tension between American patriotism and the idea that America doesn't exist, that it's really like a Jewish occupied, you know, Zog. Like, and also he'll be talking shit about the Soviets and how Americans are the best at everything. And they're going to beat the Soviets, and then talk about how all these fucking American scientists that are going to beat the Soviets are all like satanic Jew shapeshifters and stuff, denying the truth of God. Like,
so does he literally talk about like reptilian aliens who are evil?
He does in the 50s. But to get there, we got to get through the Gale to Swift's Oprah.
I mean, this is very interesting because, you know, of course, there is this reptilian conspiracy theory, and many people point out how it kind of really, really sounds like a lot of these people are actually talking about Jews. And then we can literally find the history of that thought, and in the 50s for this guy, the reptilians literally were Jews.
I am right now forgetting the name of it was like Mice or something like that. But there was a writer that was kind of outside the movement adjacent, that I think invented the idea that Satan was a reptilian ape. A lot of times they play down the reptile part. So I would say that probably they have like a shared origin, if nothing else. But sometimes they'll take effort to be like, well, serpent really just means like magician. So he was an alien ape magician when they're trying to make it sound less ridiculous. He was like a chimp with a top hat.
Yes,
that seduced Eve.
Perfectly reasonable. Yeah.
Yeah. Just pulled, I guess, Jews out of his hat, I guess is how it goes. So I don't know, man. Don't ask me. Let's ask Gale. Here. Okay. So William Potter Gale, he's an interesting fella as well. Born in 1917, which is the year of the Balfour Declaration, incidentally. So he's about 4 to 5 years Swift's junior. So Gale's real contribution to Christian identity comes in the texts he writes in the 50s and 60s. And so in his work, Gale proved that all non-whites were Jews because Satan had mixed his seed with the pre-Adamic races, thus producing Asiatic Jews and black Jews. So he solves the Asian problem. The devil's seed was essentially visible in the pigment of a person's skin, making anybody of color apparently a descendant of Satan himself, and also a Jew. So But if you get him feeling a bit more historical about it, he'll go into more detail, I guess. And he'll tell you that it was a descendant of Cain that hooked up with Judah. Judah's son, with a Canaanite woman, eventually bore Shelah. She bore Shelah. Her tribe, then Shelah's tribe, got down and dirty with the mongrelized descendants of Esau, who became the swarthy Edomites. And those guys in the kingdom of Judah became the historical Jews, who he calls the Yehudi. Just to simplify everything, so as not to confuse the Yehudi Jews with the other 6 billion Jews on the planet who are everybody else who's not white. The Yehudi now, as like these elite Jews, go from nation to nation, bilking them for the profits and setting up banks in Holland and Switzerland to dominate Adam's family. So that's Gale. Gale, though, also, and I'm going to, in the 50s and Swift, both of them, at this point, as soon as aliens become like a fun thing, you know, after the whole like Roswell deal and all that, whatever mystique around it, they just start throwing in the aliens, and any problem that they had before is solved by aliens. And Gale really kicks that off. He starts off with like UFOs, talking about biblical evidence of UFOs, shit like that, and then Swift picks it up, develops it more, and that kind of interplays where they get into space aliens. So it all becomes one big thing. So basically, what I told you at the introduction, that's where I would say their creation story leaves off. Before it gets like, and then later on they kind of like will downplay some of the alien stuff when you get into like the 70s and 80s, but it was definitely a huge part of it in the 50s and 60s. Yeah. Okay, so so Swift and Gale, Rescue Rangers, have a lot in common, obviously. They're both very popular voices in the movement, but Swift's ministry is a little more popular. It's a little more popular. He had an ace in the hole that Gale did not have, and Gale resented for many, many years. And that's a man named Gerald L.K. Smith, who we've mentioned at least 3 times, I think, in this arc. Already in the late 30s, Jerry Smith, who I think is also, isn't that the name of the guy on fucking Rick and Morty? I think it's Jerry Smith. Yeah. All right.
Oh, maybe, yeah.
Well, Jerry was like a central figure in the BI movement, but not because he believed any of it, really. I think he was pretty loose on it. He would say he did, blah, blah, blah. He would even do sermons, but they kind of sucked. But he was like the glue that held the whole U.S. movement together, like after Vancouver left the Toronto people and all that. He was everywhere, and he was also the glue that kept the KKK tightly related to British Israelism and Christian identity. So he was even like called by the press the doyen of anti-Semitism. So back in 46, Smith was being invited as a speaker to like various high schools or community centers, and very often crowds would meet to like boo him and jeer him, push him off stage and stuff like that. I mean, this is like wartime. Nazis are no longer popular. And so at one event, Smith had to be escorted off the stage by police to protect him, onto the stage rather, by police to protect him and his wife from all these picketers and like throwing things and shit. And so when he comes up on the stage, a man in his early 30s leans over to Smith and says, "Don't be afraid, Mr. Smith. Anyone who comes towards you will be sorry." And he lifted his coat, Smith recalls, and there he held a black automatic pistol. And that was how Jerry Smith met Wesley Smith. Swift. Fuck. Jerry Smith. Gerald Smith met Wesley Swift. Motherfuckers. The names make this like 100 times harder, I have to say. Because they're all almost the same name, including their organizations. All their organizations are almost the same name. These fucking guys. So I mean, Jerry met Wes.
The way I did it when talking about British Israelism is like I just skipped like 15 people because
I did too.
they were all the same guy, basically.
Yeah, we're skipping a lot of people here, really. Like, there's no way not to do this, you know. So I'm trying to focus on Wesley Swift here, but yes, Wesley Swift and Gale. That's all who I really want us to have in mind in this episode. All right. So Wes is already kind of doing fine in this fascist network even before he meets Smith, Wesley Swift. In August the year before, in 1945, Swift was formally admitted into the KKK after having spent the previous month organizing youth groups who would, according to plan, fall secretly under the auspices of the KKK without the participants being informed ahead of time. The idea being to like propagandize to kids, I guess, at summer camp. So in 46, the LA Daily News reported that Swift was the KKK organizational spellbinder of Lancaster, California. And he had invested heavily in guns. So about a week later, another article runs noting that 5 black people were chased out of Big Bear Valley area in California, and Swift was quoted as saying that the Klan intended to remain in the valley and hold the line of pure Americanism. In the same year, he met Smith. Swift was doing propaganda for the Christian Nationalist Crusade and founded something called the Anglo-Saxon Christian Congregation in Lancaster, which is something I wish I could skip because of the fucking name, but I can't, because everything that happens from this point on becomes like instrumental in everything else. So Anglo-Saxon Christian Congregation, God fucking damn it. Remember that name, by the way, because I'm going to change it in like 2 fucking paragraphs. All right. So Smith, on the other hand, had spent the first half of the 40s running for president. And this confused me early on in this arc because I had said that Coughlin and Lindbergh were involved with Gerald L.K. Smith when they made the America First Party. That's not exactly true. So here's the true story of that party. So this party basically happened at the end of the America First Committee and is essentially irrelevant to history, this party. So except that it really wasted a lot of like low-key the time of a lot of like low-key anti-Semites. But so anyway, like the America First Committee back in 41 that we talked about, the America First Party was also a reactionary anti-Semitic isolationist party. And all of this Nazi shit, though, was right out in front in their candidacy, whereas it was like trying to be shoved in the way back in the committee. So people like Robert E. Wood, the chairman of the America First Committee, Harry Bennett, who we talked about in the Ford episode, the Ford's tiger-owning like henchman, and Wendell Willkie, FDR's Republican rival, were all said to have been in this party by Smith. Smith would like fucking nominate these people, or like they'd have votes and like elect them to be their presidential nominee or vice presidential nominee, and they would all like have to publicly denounce this, you know? And he kept doing this. This is most of what Smith did in the 40s. Like, so he for instance, at a party convention for the America First Party, which God knows how many people were there, he was elected the presidential candidate, and they elected Governor Bricker as the vice president. But Governor Bricker immediately gets on the thing and like denounces Smith and his whole organization as cheap demagoguery. He says he's never talked to them, he fucking hates them, and all that. So the position goes instead to Harry Romer, who's like a Coughlin right-hand man kind of guy, like a Coughlin henchman. So that was Coughlin's connection. His henchman was the vice president ticket on this America First thing. And in the end, like the Smith guy gets like less than 2,000 votes in the entirety of America out of like almost 50 million votes. And, but it, like, he still keeps going. He's got like publications going. And, so he's just kind of like your classic, like, Nazi fuck up type, really, like on the political sphere. He keeps doing, he never stops either. Like he eventually does like a John Bricker for presidency committee that John Bricker has to publicly denounce, you know, like he's constantly forcing people to publicly denounce him. Yeah, but nonetheless, he keeps like every major figure in British identity in California together. So yeah, he'd seen better days, Smith. Like, Smith is mostly getting booed off of stages and having things thrown at him and stuff like that. But Wesley Swift, I think, showed Smith that, they can breathe some new life into this movement. And so Smith begins to hook up Swift with Klansmen, who he was already kind of in touch with, but like Smith knows them all, Jerry Smith. So he starts promoting his sermons to other right-wing militant groups. He like books Swift gigs and starts promoting Christian identity, as it's now becoming like slowly called, over British Israelism. And
Do you know what are the origins of that term?
Rand.
But we talked about it a little bit there. The roots of it, the term, are even in Britain, like in 19th century. Some of the authors of British Israelism really insist. Like, I think there was a publication which was called Identity, even in Britain already. So, because the point was, white people or Brits need to become aware of their true identity. Mm-hmm. So that's
Also, Rand specifically mentioned it, and he's that like really important figure in that path between BI to CI. So this is the 50s. All right, Wes starts 1950 with like $40,000 in his pocket, old timey money, getting paid at this point basically to promote promote other racist groups, and he tells people that he won't stop fighting until every communist and every subversive Jew is behind barbed wire. And then he ends. This is like well after the camps were uncovered. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
This is okay. So he ends the 50s as a regular interview guest of the FBI, though. So this is like his fucking year. His decade, rather. He's got the aliens come in now. He's getting paid. He's got the message. The FBI thinks he's important, and so at a small meeting in Salt Lake City to some Mormons who received him very enthusiastically, he called on Utahns to raise an army to protect themselves from Satan's forces. And an FBI report tells it like this. He told the Utahns, some 35 of them, that Los Angeles chief of police asked him for such a force to assist during a war, and that 20,000 sportsmen are armed and ready for possible uprisings. That he said that this man, the Los Angeles chief of police, told him, Wes Swift, the alien guy, to raise an army of 20,000 sportsmen to assist the Los Angeles police force.
I mean, I could believe that.
I could too.
That's the most realistic thing so far in the episode.
I think 20,000 might be a bit much.
Well, I believe that he told him that. I'm not.
Well, the chief of police says it didn't happen.
Okay. When the FBI asked him, I guess.
Exactly. The FBI said, like, hey, you didn't try to raise a private Nazi army, did you? To fight the satanic aliens. But also... Swift starts to claim that the FBI is behind him. And the FBI gets a letter from the Anti-Defamation League saying, like, hey, Jim, or whatever his first name is, I forget, Lou, hey, Lou, is this guy your friend? Let us know. It's like really informal and kind of cute. And so they launch into this investigation. So, all right. So West publicly declares at a Los Angeles meeting in 1950 that the FBI themselves consider him an authority on un-American activities, and that the Bureau personally recommended him to the master of the Santa Paula Masonic Lodge as a public speaker, which is a really weird flex. So the FBI hears this news in a slightly sardonic letter, like I said, from the ADL. The FBI contacts the Masonic Lodge, who claims that one of their members did invite him to speak. No one from the FBI was ever in contact with him, except to send them a file on Swift, which after reading they canceled his speaking date. But so, okay, no biggie, but he's like dropping the FBI's name.
But that's also very weird, like FBI sending a file to a Masonic lodge. I mean, that's also...
That's true.
I mean...
Yeah, that's fun. So the next month, Swift follows his buddy Jerry Smith into that career of having like tomatoes thrown at him and stuff like that and getting booed off stage. Like at a high school, he like loses his shit and starts like screaming at everybody and calls them the most discourteous audience I'd ever met and stuff like this. He also in this time shoots himself in the hand with a .357 Magnum, and his wife leaves him. Divorces him. I don't think it's connected. She divorces him on grounds of, quote, extreme cruelty. Mm-hmm. So some dark shit, I think, there. But for Swift, it's not all bad because he actually does end up getting invited to testify as an expert on un-American activities in front of John Rankin.
So he was probably telling the truth. Yeah.
I mean, look, he was there. I don't know, right? The FBI, I read a lot of the FBI's stuff on him. Mm-hmm. But there are interesting things. So John Rankin, like as we all know, was like the Witcher of the House Un-American Activities and stuff like that. So that's who he was like tight with. And the FBI also has a report showing that by 51, like he's getting $10,000 a loan just from his school in LA teaching like Bible colleges to future Christian identity people, So he's getting like, which is about like 104,000 today. And that's only one of his like many, many hustles now. So around this time, Swift opens the X-Files and starts the whole cosmic contribution to Christian identity, And he's also got some hustle that I have no information on called direct credit that the FBI was apparently monitoring, which sounds like a scam. It's like Direct Credit Incorporated. And he's still tight with Jerry Smith and all that. So, so overall, he's doing okay. He's speaking at the Congressional Hotel in Washington, D.C. about communism in the Pentagon and the one world government of the UN, that kind of stuff. So that's when Swift meets Gale, who's also rising up in the thing, He's bringing like some of that UFO stuff too. So Gale is interesting. He was actually a colonel under General Douglas MacArthur, and he helped organize guerrilla forces in the Philippines. So he's like an actual like dude, you know what I mean? He's So it won't surprise you to know then that Gale becomes probably the father of the American militia movement here. Gale
there are the people who claimed there that we will talk about that in an episode on Minutemen, but
Gale and Swift are both integrated into Minutemen or Minutemen-like organizations. So Gale is made a minister of the Anglo-Saxon Christian Federation, which is now renamed, thank you very much, to the Church of Jesus Christ Christian, which I think if anybody knows much about like Aryan nations, Christian identity, I think you'll probably recognize that name, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So this is in 56, and Gale's a minister of it now. So the church would become, of course, a spiritual home of Christian identity for decades to follow. So we can leave most of the names aside now. So shortly before changing the name, Swift gives a speech to his congregation claiming that the FBI is in full agreement with Dr. Swift. Sorry, this is a report about the speech, but that's why he's using his own name, was in full agreement with Dr. Swift and his associates. So after 6 years, the FBI like finally starts calling him in for interviews and stuff. So Agent Belmont makes first contact. And apparently they don't do any fucking research. Agent Belmont doesn't open his file before this interview, says he has no idea the guy's hooked up with the Klan and stuff like that, and was surprised to read about it after the interview. But Agent Belmont just says this. It became immediately apparent that Dr. Swift was rabidly anti-communist, anti-Negro, anti-Semitic. As a consequence, my conversation with him was extremely guarded, and insofar as possible, the conversation was kept on trivialities such as the weather, etc. That's it. That's it. Swift in this interview with Belmont is like appalled that he insulted the FBI by name dropping them and like begs their forgiveness. And like promises that he would never do anything to hurt the FBI, And like this seems like it's kind of enough for them. Like they keep tabs on him, but they don't really do anything about him. Like in 58, like he's making a shit ton of money. He buys 3 brand new cars and stuff. The FBI receives like information that he might be getting an annual annuity from Ford's estate, Henry Ford's estate. Which, if anything, would have come from Bill Cameron, so it's possible. Right. But they don't really seem to fucking look into it. And but they also claim like stupid shit, like that he speaks 5 languages, which is definitely not true, and like that he has like a doctorate, which I doubt, but maybe he does. I'm sorry if he does, but they also start to imply that there is somebody in the Army intelligence that is communicating with Swift, and they do a whole investigation into this thing that's called something like Agent X. Like that's how they refer to this person. And they're not in the investigation on the FBI side is just to figure out whether or not Swift has a relationship with Army intelligence or not. And most of those documents are like completely redacted. You can't see like anything on them, except that they didn't decide in the end. So I don't know. It's weird, But Swift also like he lied like the rest of these guys. He's like a Myatt type, He can throw in ideology with lies, with like stories that he doesn't fucking do and shit like that. Promises that he can never keep, things like that, Right. Lots of bravado. So for all we know, he was just like Alex Jones is. I've got a guy. I know a guy in the CIA. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it could be anything really. But anyway, like, yeah, the FBI follows him, but they don't do shit about him. So finally in 1960, between writers like Conrad Gard, who wrote that every mixed race baby is a step towards the Jewish conquest of the world.
Oh.
A lawyer named Bertrand Comparet, who wrote that Satan is the pre-Adamite reptilian magician. There's your reptilian magician there.
Yeah.
William Gale, we know, and Wesley Smith. Like, between all those guys, Christian identity theology like meant something now. It became pretty cohesive, and it was definitively separated from British Israelism by a rejection, first of all, of like this pyramidistic prophecy stuff. The pyramids for the Christian identity is just like a way to pat yourself on the back if you're white. That's all it was. Look what we built, done. You know, the only prophecy that mattered for Christian identity would be the coming like Ragnarok between the forces of Satan kind of thing. You know, so not to confuse anybody, they didn't call it Ragnarok. The Odinism was developing independently, but yeah. So anyway, so Christian identity is now about done by 1960. That's when we can really say it's like a solid theology, so to speak.
So
right?
It took like a good 30, 40 years.
Yeah, it had to like worm its way out of British Israelism. I get the sense that they were just kind of like embarrassed by British Israelism. They saw it as like kind of old timey, and it didn't ever work out, and their predictions never came true and shit. So fuck them, you know. And also they would never cross the line in saying that the Jews were the sons of Satan. So the Christian identity guys really drew a line in the sand with that one. You know, it totally different story at that point. Really, it just like rides through the passages opened by British Israelism. So, so the Christian Defense League is formed by Swift and Gale, and this is like overtly a Christian identity outgrowth. So publicly, it's only about it's like I have their statements here. I'll just sum it. It's like to promote knowledge and belief of the tenets of Christianity and advocate high moral standards and ethics, stuff like that, and to like oppose persecution of Christians and fend off against attacks against Christianity. So very vague, the public face. Privately, hard to say what was going on. There's lots of journalistic information about this group, but, you know, I mean, the FBI dismisses it too. So again, I could believe either story, to tell you the truth. Like, there are stories that they were planning to murder Martin Luther King, that they were preparing a revolution, that they were bombing synagogues, but like, the investigations don't seem to really go anywhere in the FBI. They're kind of dismissed. So I don't know.
I mean, I could absolutely believe that they were planning those things.
Yeah, totally.
Without a doubt.
And I could also believe, though, that Swift would announce these things and not do them, because he does that kind of shit.
Right.
So like Swift was, while he was doing this stuff, he was also keeping the California Klan alive. So he and the Florida Klan too. So like in Florida, he goes there and he consolidates these different clans into the United Florida Ku Klux Klan in 1961, and then he goes back and gathers up what's left of the West Coast Klan and renames them the Christian Knights of the Invisible Empire, because the Klan had been outlawed. And so they hold their first meeting and like all their meetings at his house in Lancaster. He's got like a ranch and shit. Like he's got stuff, you know.
He made money. Like
he was rich, this dude. Yeah. So it was attended by 38 whole members. This is the entirety of the West Coast Klan at this point. All 38.
Wait, also 38, wasn't that like there are 35 Mormons and now 38 Klansmen?
It's all 30. It's numerologize that.
All right.
Where's your pyramid inch now? I'll show you a pyramid inch. So they were, so these 38 people were given uniforms by Swift, like eye holes pre-cut out and everything, with like badges. They were all required to carry firearms. And officially Gale was their leader, but once again, Swift kind of steals the spotlight and like everybody looks to Swift for everything. So on November 5th, the FBI gets wind of a plan by the this Christian Knights of the Invisible Empire to burn a television shop of a black guy in Lancaster. And then on the 10th, the FBI reports that they watched the shop burn.
Of course they did.
5 days later. Yeah. Thank you, FBI. Thank you.
Yes.
So glad you're spying on everybody. Fuck.
Yeah, they didn't really have a problem with that.
No, clearly.
Clearly. You think that like this kind of split from British Israelism also was a way of making it more racist, like in the American sense, in a way that British Israelism doesn't apply? You kind of know that these guys want to find some religious justification for like particularly, the most popular American anti-black racism, which, they had before, right? But then kind of abolitionism comes out of a, conflict within like the American Protestantism about whether, slavery is acceptable or not. And that this is just kind of a way of recovering the good old days where, you could be like, black people aren't humans.
I think so. I think like British Israelism was to British colonialism what like Christian identity is to American slavery, like
right.
It was I mean, not to like whatever downplay how fucking horrible British colonialism was. And
well, it wasn't so much directed to like bigotry at home, right? Because it was still
and it wasn't as dualistic. It had a lot of spaces for different levels of gray, and different ways to like still have a place in the world. But like no, these guys were like, black people aren't people at all.
Right.
Jews aren't people at all. Like biologically, they're not people.
Yeah. Which like the mainstream churches had to kind of change their stances on that over the years, Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, why? It's because the Catholic Church is the seed of Nimrod.
That's
Boris, don't you remember your Bible? They refer to shit like lots of like. They refer to something Swift refers to something called the Cosmic Bible, which I wasn't really able to substantiate as an actual book, sadly. But he refers to it a bit, and a lot of it's about how the 12 tribes all line up with the 12 constellations, and and that each constellation, in some cases, seems to depict like a possible origin point. Although I might have been misunderstanding that because he's very hard to understand. It's like his points. Yeah. His main concern though throughout the 50s though is definitely like an army of Sputniks flying around dropping nuclear bombs all over America and stuff.
Sweet.
Yeah. So, a couple weeks after this guy loses his store to the FBI not, intervening, a very important event happens in America in the 60s. Boys, you know what it is. This shit happened.
Which one?
Where were you? Where were you on the day when JFK died?
Oh, okay.
I was in a warehouse on an upper floor.
So, was it a book depository?
A book depository, yeah. I've been there, actually. It's a shrine. It's a pretty amazing place. So, the assassination of JFK happens November 22nd, 1963. And this is a shock to most of America, but not to Wesley Swift. He's not even in the picture. Swift. On the night of the Kennedy assassination, Swift held a meeting at the Hollywood Women's Club. And I'm going to let the FBI explain what happened here. This is a report from the 29th, but about a meeting on the night that JFK was assassinated.
Okay.
The report reflects that Dr. Swift started this meeting with the story of how the assassination of President Kennedy was part of a prophecy having to do with Uranus. Swift had said he had predicted in 1963 that President Kennedy would not live to finish his term in office, which prediction was based on Bible prophecy and the study of the cosmos, and that these prophecies had come true. So Swift claimed that if the FBI had been hunting the Jews instead of his friends, this might not have happened. Right? So was it a prophecy or not? I don't know. And now there was a general attempt to smear the right, including planting bombs and talking shit about Christian identity people, blaming everything on right-wingers, because right-wingers were quickly blamed for the assassination of JFK. So morally, Kennedy's assassination was at least partly justified by claiming that Kennedy had failed the Cubans and the Hungarians in their fight against communism, the Jews, Satan, and then went on to claim that the UN wanted to stop Swift from having whites, the UN now, from having whites only churches, and thus the invasion of the mongrel hordes was inevitable, and Aryans better load up on their guns. And that's November 22nd, 1963, our buddy Swift here.
So there's a lot of stuff there. There's a lot. Yeah.
Well, that's him. Like, he cannot keep topic ever, He said that the Jews were unhappy, though, with the Kennedy assassination, which is interesting, because they will lose some of their political influence in the White House now because Kennedy is dead. So you want to think like, at least the Jews didn't do it. But he says that the communists did it, who are also Jews, and the communists were assassinated by a Jew gangster who was also a Jew. So I have no idea what he wants us to believe here. Okay. But Swift hypothesizes that JFK might have himself been under hypnosis or potentially had a lobotomy, which does run in the family. So maybe he was a victim of this thing. So on his second speech, 2 days later, he clarifies this prophecy. It makes it very specific, and he says that in January of 1963, he said, "On November 22nd, 1963, at 12:45 p.m., something drastic would happen to the President of the United States." That's his prophecy that he claims he made in January. Very specific. The document ends with the usual like FBI like semi-credulity, and it says this. Los Angeles will, through above source, attempt to secure the tape of pertinent meeting of January, review tape, and determine if Swift did indeed make prophecy, and advise Bureau, just in case he's psychic. All right, so about a year later when they found it, all they could find was Swift saying something like Kennedy will enter a critical period sometime in the future, but also mentioned that there was thousands of red Chinese soldiers on the Mexican border waiting to invade San Diego. Yeah.
Nice.
All right, so there's a lot of like strange and like eventually uninvestigated plots that the FBI keeps getting like wind of, including one that an informant to the FBI claimed that Swift and the First Church of Christ Christian had this massive plan to assassinate 300 public officials and industry figures and cultural figures and stuff. The informant stated that although he had never formally joined this organization, he was given to understand that he was in. He also was told that he might be tapped for one of the 8 men who would eliminate the officials. So just some fucking guy shows up to a meeting and they're like, "Yo, you're in, right? You in? Mm-hmm. You could be one of the 8 guys that takes out the fucking president." You know what I mean? So, so this in the end, of course, didn't happen, but also the FBI didn't really seem very worried about it. And in 1962, Swift was reportedly in charge of a large group of, quote, Minutemen, who were supposed to head down to this is Minutemen lowercase, though, which is interesting. So to head down to Mississippi in September to prevent black students, adult students from registering at Ole Miss. So when the date came around, the feds found him like just chilling at home anyway in Lancaster. So I don't know, he would make, I don't know if the feds are like intervening, I don't know, or if he's just full of shit, maybe both. But so Swift and Gale really get their militia on though finally with the California Rangers. So the Rangers start in 1963 with Gale, who was apparently involved with the Minutemen. The Minutemen. We'll have an episode on them. William Potter Gale is, in this telling, considered one of the founders of the American militia movement. The California Rangers were an underground guerrilla group preparing to defend America from a communist takeover in Southern California. So in 1964, Swift announces he's leaving the KKK to focus on his Christian Defense League, and he spends some of that time of the year communicating with George Lincoln Rockwell, though it's not sure if these meetings really happened or not, but the FBI thinks that Swift was actually giving Rockwell money.
George Lincoln Rockwell, by the way, American Nazi Party.
Thank you. Yeah. And that's the supposed reason for these meetings was that Rockwell wanted the ANP to have something like what Hitler had, like positive Christianity. He was talking to Swift about supposedly a theology for the ANP. So what we do know for sure, though, is that Swift joins the California Rangers, Gale's group, in 1965, and steals all of Gale's thunder once again. The Rangers become a militant arm of the Church of Jesus Christ Christian and the Christian Defense League, and was like definitively a Christian identity militia. So Swift hosts training camps at his huge ranch in Kern County in California, where he personally owned 100 to 150 concealable firearms, as well as like a Black Eagle standard that he would carry out during the trainings and the gun range and shit. So
wait, what do you mean? Like he had his own standard that was a Black Eagle?
Yeah. Well, no, it was exactly. He like made this like the old German standard that he could carry around with him. So the California Attorney General takes Swift a bit more seriously than the FBI, and Swift is like inviting the FBI to his sermons and shit and all sorts of stuff. Like he really loves the FBI, but the California Attorney General actually decided to raid the homes of the Christian Defense League and the Rangers in 1965, and one Christian Defense Leaguer had 8 machine guns and an assortment, quote, of other weapons, which I know included swords. It just fucking had to. A Ranger, yeah, for sure. A mace.
Pikes.
Yes.
Yeah.
A halberd.
Yes.
So a ranger was also arrested for selling a machine gun and a submachine gun to an undercover DA agent, another Christian identity tradition that we know from Sutter.
Oh, yeah.
In both arrests, Swift was named, or Sutter was trying to buy, wasn't he? Yeah, this guy was selling.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So in both arrests, Swift was named as like a key person in both of these organizations. So like the FBI didn't do shit about him, but the DA like made him famous, as like a absolute link to like militant terrorist groups and shit. But in the meantime, like Gale, who is like sick of Swift stepping on his toes and taking his thunder and all that, Gale starts to go into this like hardcore theology of taxes, and also starts his own kind of special private militias that Swift is not invited to, where he can be the boss. So of course Swift like takes over the theology, whatever. But in general, Gale should get credit for this like weird origin of like tax resisting militiamen in the woods and that kind of shit.
I made my own money, which I used to pay myself for groceries, which I gathered from the forest.
So in the late 60s, Gale creates the United States Christian Posse, and he's which as a group is a founding member of Posse Comitatus. Basically, like the Articles of the Confederation are the only true document of the government as like ordained, in their case, ordained by God himself. Basically, the Articles of the Confederation for Gale are a holy document, like kind of an extension of the Bible, and that everything after that is corrupt, is like a corrupt Jewish thing. Including like their entire economic system and taxation system, but yet they're still constitutionalists. So fuck you, you can't do that. I don't know what the fuck you're talking about. So so basically, like the IRS is like a satanic psyop, Yeah. And Posse Comitatus still like kind of thrives today in a lot of forms. Like it essentially like leading us today to those motherfuckers, those fucking idiots, sovereign citizen movement.
Yeah,
there's an absolute direct
Absolutely.
line to the sovereign citizen movement from these idiots who think that Jews are from a satanic alien lizard ape.
Yeah.
That's where the sovereign citizen movement comes from.
I'm only required by state law to roll down my window just enough to facilitate conversation and passage of documents.
So, one of the largest growing movements in America. Yeah. Yes. Hey.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of things come.
Yeah, a lot of things come from this shit. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So the tax thing, though, actually goes back to Cameron and his people. So, like, there's like a complicated theological justification, of course, for this. In 1933, Cameron, degenerate drunk, gave an address to British Israelites called the Economic Law of God. So Cameron introduced the idea of biblical economics, which was a combination of individualism and some form of social justice. The divine mandate forbade taxes on land or any other form of personal property, and only surplus over your livelihood could be taxed, and in that only a slight degree. It was agreed to 10%, which would eventually drop to 5%. Of course, he also maintains medieval prohibitions on charging interest and all that kind of stuff, and he calls all of this a masterpiece of economic legislation of divine economics. So Cameron now passes this torch, this is his development and contribution, to Howard Rand, who we remember from British Israelism, first Christian identity-ish kind of guy. Okay, Howard Rand sets up the Israel standard and opposes it to the Babylon standard, or what Swift would call the Babylon standard, because that's how he said Babylon. So, the standard of Babylon. So this is literally, the Israel standard is literally a standard of weights and measures that were inherently inserted implicit in the value that God gave gold and silver, which will always keep each other's value stable. And if you move one, the currency goes crazy and the Jews take control. So what we need to do is get silver back into coinage so that God's economics can finally receive like balance again. And then as like Gale would later say, every man will be a capitalist.
Dum 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 dum.
Yeah.
So we need silver and gold.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
And then no sales tax or anything like that. Just general only taxes on private profits and a small tax, a flat tax instead of a flat, like an actual like Ross Perot style flat tax.
So he wasn't. I'd imagine they weren't very happy about the U.S. going off the gold standard.
I think that probably fucked them up real bad.
The 30s, right?
Yeah. Well, no, actually, I think after that, yes, I know what happened after that. Swift starts telling everybody that gold is like an absurd obsession that they need to give up on, and that what is it like? I don't know. I think he just kind of gives up and says the whole fucking economy now is Jewish, and like, what are we gonna do except fight and get guns and shit? You know, I think that's where it goes. All right, so
I assume it's probably not a coincidence that these kind of anti-tax dudes also just happen to be rich.
Yeah. Oh, and you know what? Also, what's funny is that this tax issue also really helps separate the British Israelites from the Christian identitarians, because like even though Rand and Cameron said there was this like holy tax system and like an unholy tax system, they also specifically said you shouldn't rebel against it. You know, you just got to like be pious enough and spread the good word, and eventually it'll like wither away, you know? So Christian identity is like, fuck you. I've got 150 guns in my house. I'm going to kill me some lizards, you know? So they stopped listening to British Israelism, I think, completely around that time too. So kind of this culminates in this time, right? Around this time that they're publishing, the Christian identity stuff is being published about taxes, Swift and Gale's stuff. This North Dakota farmer and Christian identity follower named Gordon Call stopped paying taxes. And he was doing pretty good until about 1983, when he shot dead 2 federal marshals before getting gunned down by the FBI in Arkansas. And his message to the IRS when he declared independence in 1967 was that he would no longer, quote, no longer pay tithes to the synagogue of Satan. And this attitude reflects the entire post-50s direction of Christian identity, wherein like the U.S. kind of doesn't exist, but also we're patriots. And the true patriots are Christian Aryan soldiers, not Catholics. And of course, the Constitution that we love and support is a corrupt document written by Jews. So, chef's kiss for all that. So, anyway, Gordon Call's Violent End was essentially written by Gale. Yeah, Gale sets all that up. He merged BI economics into identity economics, and but also really pushed, because he was this like trained guerrilla organizer. His true passion was militias, and he personally worked this ideology into the American militia movement. So Wesley Swift, by 1970, riddled with kidney disease and diabetes, finally dies of a heart attack at a very generous, I would say, 77 years of age in a clinic in Mexico while waiting to be seen. And before he returns to the plane of Aryan space energy, though, he became a mentor to one Richard Gint Butler, who I believe Boris will regale us with tales about soon. So immediately after Swift's death, Gale starts talking shit about Swift. He's been fed up with this guy for so long. Swift takes all of his thunder. He gets all the credit, you know, like he's the California Rangers. Why? You know, fucking Gale started all that shit. So as soon as he's dead, somebody writes, an anonymous person writes a public letter somewhere that says like, who really is Colonel Gale? And it like questions his loyalties and stuff. So Gale takes this as like one of Swift's people and just like goes off on him. Yeah, so says that Swift is like basically a poser, like a Johnny-come-lately to the identity movement, which is weird because Swift taught Gale. And he calls his supporters jealous of Gale's own achievements. And now that Swift is gone, Gale's theology would just erase Swift from history anyway. Like, he fucking hates him, you know? Mm-hmm. Gale also accused Swift of trying to smear him by spreading a rumor that Gale was in the CIA. He claims that Swift tried to shut down Gale's gospel because it was eating out of Swift's profits. So, you know, there's something kind of interesting about this, and that is, like, that very ambiguous relationship that Swift seems to have had with the FBI. And there is a part of me that wants to kind of believe Gale on a lot of this, you know, that like Swift was like pulling all this kind of insight role type shit, you know, but I don't know, who knows, who cares? So so these Swiftites now would be like Richard Butler Aryan nations going on in that direction, and the Galeites would become Posse Comitatus, a lot of the American militia movement, in that kind of way. So those are the paths that started to diverge then between the Swiftites and the Galeites, which is, I would say, like a part of theology you don't learn much about, you know? Yeah.
No.
We're adding to like,
You're hearing it here, folks.
Yeah, along with, Isaac and Abraham, and you had
Gale
Wes
and Swift.
Wes and Bill. Okay, so we're getting pretty close to the end here, of course. Everybody's, breaking up. People are dying. Gale himself, he gets sentenced for tax dodging. Of course. So, I mean, at least he, went doing something he believed in. He dies of emphysema before he makes it to jail. But in 71, by the way. So the epilogue of all of this is embodied in stuff like the Church of the Creator and the Creativity movement, centered around white people as God's children that incorporated like social Darwinism into Christian identity.
So creativity, the Church of Creator also has roots in...
I don't know if those roots are personal or, but it's the implication is that their theology is philosophically built from these foundations. Yeah. Butler, of course, who became head of the Christian Defense League in California, moved away in 73, right, to go off and do his thing, which Boris will talk about.
And we'll have a whole episode on the Aryan nation.
So he left it to another disciple of Swift named James K. Warner. And Warner was originally in the National Socialist White People's Party, and his original faith was Odinism, which I thought was just fun. Though he converted to identity in LA, where he started the New Christian Crusade Church. But I guess the most interesting developments were groups like this guy, Dan Gaiman's Church of Israel, and James Ellison, and the what is it called? Covenant Sword and Arm of the Lord, I think is what it's called, which were like these like really important survivalist compounds in rural areas to defend themselves against the ultimate upcoming cataclysmic battle with Satan and all his forces of the government and stuff like that. So Ellison was based out in Arkansas, and he established the most fortified of all the identity settlements ever in this like 224 acre compound. So in 1974, 10 years later, in 1984, this happened. In 1974, he built the compound. So in 1984, FBI finally raided it, and they took like a huge stockpile of weapons, sentenced Ellison to 20 years in prison. And Oh, and you know what else? Christian identity also influenced William Pierce's National Alliance somehow, as well as some parts of the Order in the 1980s. So there's a lot of like...
I mean, Christian identity is something that will
creeping roots.
Continue to see over and over again. It's influenced like up and till now even. So if you're talking about like anything in North America with Nazis after the 60s, basically, it's going to come up in some form.
Yeah, we also have an episode on the Order, I think, probably.
Yeah,
right.
We will.
Well, guys, that's it. That's your Christian identification episode.
It was more space. There was more space stuff than I expected, I have to say.
I can admit to a slight prejudice on the space materials. There is, to be fair, a huge diversity of thematic material from Wesley Swift in particular. The man, you could find hundreds and hundreds of his recorded sermons, and they cover just endless topics, really. He had Friday night news updates that would go on for 44 minutes of him just fucking babbling, just constant. So, but the alien stuff, became, I think because if it was just Swift or just Gale, I probably wouldn't have spent as much time on it. But since both of them made it a key part of their theology, and that theology became whatever approaches canon, I figured it was, I think maybe it has its proper place. I think it is pretty central. Yeah.
So Butler, of course, is a person who ties a lot of things in this arc. He was in the 30s a member of the Silver Shirts that we have an episode on. And as Fritz explained, he was mentored by Swift, one of the founders of Christian Identity, and then was a founder of Aryan Nations himself, out of which Joshua Sutter, the recently outed FBI informant, comes. So, a lot of things are connected here. Through him.
Yeah, and the FBI kind of connects them in a fun way, doesn't
it? Yeah. And Richard Butler was around for a while. I mean, that fucking dude lived well into his 80s, I think. It was in 2000 something, 2004 or 5 or something.
Yeah, early 2000s he died,
Yeah, it was a pretty prolific career. Yeah. No, this is pretty wacky stuff. Although, I mean, really, the thing that, I always keep in mind when I'm reading this shit now is that, yeah, it's insane, but it's only a couple degrees more insane than the general everyday acceptable racism that was going on at the time.
This whole thing is a story of degrees, of a slide from the 19th century to the 1960s.
Right. If we're talking about if in the 30s they're talking about how Adam, the children of Satan are what's wrong with the planet, and any kind of person that is not white is also the product of Satan and there to draw you into sin. I mean, like, you know, if you think about that in media in like 1932, like Marlene Dietrich singing in Blonde Venus about like how, you know, black and African temptation is driving her to sin. Like, and that's, you know, that's a big popular Hollywood thing, you know? And so this is just like, you know, a couple, they turn that up just a couple more degrees and make it even like more insane.
Yeah. Like I mentioned, like most of the shit that they drew from was stuff that was very popular, like books that were popular, ideas that were popular. I mean, like there was a popular idea going around that like each human, quote, race had its own ape that coexisted with it, but as a previous version of itself. So that, for instance, like all Asians were orangutans, etc. And then like the Europeans were the only ones that like didn't have an extant ape.
Yeah, you can see how they're
that was like popular.
Yeah, they're all very scientific. You can clearly
that
see.
Wasn't CI. That was like those were like the normies. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, so if you're talking about what was normal and popular in culture, it's, you know, even then it's not that far off from some of this shit.
Yeah, and a lot of anxieties about Asians always. But also a great discomfort in figuring out which category of weird to put them into. Yeah.
Well, yeah, because white, you know, they can say, okay, we built the pyramids. They can't be like, you know, China that's existed for as a continuous civilization for thousands of years. Yeah, you know, they got to be in what the white people show them how to build the Great Wall.
But you know what? No, that's like, the thing is they never take advantage of that. I don't know why they don't. They don't say like, oh, one of the Adamites went off and made the Chinese. They don't go. I don't know why they don't do that. But they always exclude them. They were here before everybody else, according to them. I mean, they arrived from space, but they're not like indigenous to the planet. They're also aliens. But of course, I mean,
but like inferior aliens, why?
It's not always clear that they are. It's sometimes you sometimes get the sense. Oftentimes it's very clear, like excruciatingly clear. But there are times when like they almost manage to take a similar position to the Jews, especially later, where they kind of become like another rival civilization and not necessarily like a future slave race or something like that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but yeah.
This is a very elaborate way to be a whacky racist.
It really is. Like, it really is.
Why do they need all of that to be racist? Like,
ask fucking Myatt, man.
Yeah.
For real. Like, at least this is like 14 people who wrote thousands and thousands of pages, you know? Good Lord.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to, like, my takeaway from this is that there was always these extremely nuts Nazis, it seems. Like, people that we covered... The new ones are really not the first one to be nuts in such an elaborate way. It's a tradition, obviously. So
yes. All right, so let's sign this. Let's go in peace now to love and serve whatever the aliens, I guess.
Oh yeah.
All right, in the name of the Space Father, the holy alien energy, and all that. Ciao.
Ciao.
Cheers.
Hey there, Fritz here from The Empire Never Ended. This has been one of our weekly free episodes for free people. But for premium people, we also have weekly premium episodes, which you can get at patreon.com/tenepod, TENEPOD, and also follow our various social media things in the show description there. Like and subscribe them. Follow them. Like and follow and subscribe. Follow them. Do it.